Well, I've said this week would probably be very, very Northern Ireland heavy. And at the time of recording this, the UK government and the EU are in negotiations in and around the Northern Ireland Protocol. So we don't fully yet know what the outcome of those meetings will be. We don't know what's fully being discussed. We've got an idea of what's being discussed. It's the data sharing between, shared trade data between the UK and the EU, and allowing the EU to have access to that trade data so that they can see what's coming and going, as well as the UK can see what is sort of coming and going, across the Irish Sea. That is currently, as far as we know, what is up for discussion. We don't know if there's potentially anything else, but at the moment, this is what's on the table for discussion. And of course, we've also seen Jeffrey Donaldson, certainly the leader of the DUP in the House, being marching in to number 10, certainly to have discussions with Rishi Sunak. And from what we've heard, we haven't had fully confirmation of what has happened in that meeting, but he has essentially made the demand to Sunak not to capitulate to the EU when it comes to the Northern Ireland Protocol. And I think anything positive we get out of this today, the Brexiteers are going to throw an absolute fit, and that includes the DUP as well. But why are these important? Why are we having these discussions? And why is it so important that this gets sorted out? I think that's a real main discussion, because we talk a lot about sort of the protocol, how it works, how it's failing, but we never talk about the stakes of what, getting this wrong really means. So that's what we're going to do today, and have a talk just about how Northern Ireland is open, because of Brexit, to massive food fraud. That is incredibly worrying, and should be incredibly worrying for anyone in Northern Ireland, especially with what we're about to hear from one of the experts who looks at, even himself inspects these shipments of food going to and from into Northern Ireland. Something that you may remember we warned about potentiality all the way back, starting in 2016, of Northern Ireland becoming a smuggler's paradise for, well, illicit goods. And unfortunately, because of the how bad this deal, and bear in mind, this was all on Boris Johnson and the Brexiteers who did this deal, saying that it was absolutely fantastic. This is unfortunately potentially what Northern Ireland is unfortunately looking like it is turning into, and we cannot and should not let that happen. And it is very important that we get these rules and in place and the protocol working so that we can avoid this amount of food fraud, because what you're about to hear is very, very shocking in some cases. So before we go diving into this article, please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee. And of course, as always, thank you very much to all those people who do help and support the channel. There is the link to the YouTube thank you button as well down below, and of course, the Pony Club as well. So let's rock on with this then, shall we? So this comes, I believe it's from UK Daily News, but the sort of title is "Brexit has left Northern Ireland open to food fraud, an expert warns." And oh boy, is this is this worrying. We're not going to read through the full article. It's just the first part that we want to go through, because the latter half talks about sort of his career. And to be honest, he's had a pretty good career, but that's not what we're interested in. We're more interested in what's going on in Northern Ireland and why these rules need to be sorted out, because it is very, very much very, very dangerous what could be going into Northern Ireland. So on with it. So according to a leading expert on global food security, Brexit has left Northern Ireland and the UK open to food fraud. HRS Elliott is a professor of food safety and microbiology at Queen's University in Belfast, and the founder for the Institute of Global Food Security there. The dispute over the Northern Ireland Protocol rages on. And he says that goods coming into Northern Ireland from Europe are subject to some inspections, but very few, he said. And there isn't the same level of rigour as there was before Brexit. Many companies have said they like the protocol very much, but their opinion could change if full controls and inspections come with its proper implementation, said the professor. And bear in mind, remember at the moment, the UK is not fully implementing these checks. It is on the UK that this is happening because the UK government has decided not to fully implement these checks. Remember that. Meanwhile, it continues, post Brexit controls around UK imports are even more lax. He said, a lot of food coming into the UK from outside the EU actually goes through Europe, particularly through big ports like Rotterdam, he said. When we were part of the EU, that was our first line of defense because everything that came to Rotterdam to be sold on the EU market was subject to controls and inspections. This is not the case now, as nobody cares what's in a GB bound truck until they stop and unload it in Europe. And while the EU itself supplies an estimated 30% of food consumed in the UK exports, EU exports to the UK have not been subject to controls and inspections since Brexit. Remember that that's still a thing. That is still going on. And it's shocking that it's been going on for so long, but this is because they have not put the money, they have not put the time and effort into establishing these basic checks, even the facilities to be able to do so. And in some cases, you may remember, ports have spent millions of pounds building these facilities, and they are currently sitting empty. The government dare not implement them because it would start to cause these big queues that we have warned about for some time. Remember, we've already seen these big queues, but that has been because for other reasons. It hasn't been because of these checks. The government are terrified to bring in these checks, and unfortunately, it is leading to some, I think, very disastrous consequences. But anyway, the professor continues saying this. They wanted to put controls and measures in place, but Jacob Rees-Mogg actually said it would be too expensive, the professor said. His opinion was, no, we don't do checks and inspections. We just leave that to the industry. You may remember that. That is, again, very worrying. And now here come the consequences. So we have these two vulnerabilities. We have food that comes from outside of Europe and is not currently controlled in Europe, and European food that is not controlled at all. I know these people who cheat and cheat. They just rub their hands, and to be honest, because it's like unlocking the doors and windows of the country. You can break in any time now. So there is unsafe food being sold in this country, or food that is of a lower value because, again, according to Jacob Rees-Mogg, oh, it's just too expensive. And yet, that now risks food security here in the UK. And trust me, we haven't even got to the worst part yet. To make matters worse, it continues, Brexit is part of a triple whammy. The threat to food security, supply resilience, alongside the pandemic and the conflict in Ukraine. The supply chains have changed dramatically, said the professor. We source things from places we've never had to source them before due to availability. Just before Christmas, 22 lorries of meat coming into the UK from Eastern Europe were stopped. And of the 22 lorries, 21 contained meat unfit for human consumption. 22 lorries and 21 contained meat unfit for human consumption. That's Brexit. That is not having the high standards that people like, Michael Gove claimed we would continue with. No, this is what people like Jacob Rees-Mogg want. They don't care about regulations because, as far as they're concerned, oh, it's okay, the companies will take care of it. But as you're seeing here, companies are more than happy to cheat. This is why regulations exist. This is why regulations are so, so important when it comes to these things. But anyway, it finishes us with this. It says, I think that's just the tip of a very ugly iceberg. It just so happened that the trucks were checked because they were suspicious. Can you imagine how many actually go through the system without being checked and inspected? And that's where they sort of stop talking about the current problems in and around Brexit. But yeah, that's terrifying, and he makes a very valid point. The only reason those trucks were stopped and checked because they were suspicious. How many trucks come into the UK, or even in this case, Northern Ireland, and have food on that is unfit for human consumption? Remember what we just heard there. Out of 22 trucks, 21 contained meat that was unfit for human consumption. That's Brexit. That's what it's done. And remember, this is all on Jacob Rees-Mogg because, enforcing these regulations is just too hard. It's just too expensive. It's just too protectionist. Jacob Rees-Mogg will cry, but unfortunately, these have consequences. This is risking people's health, and it's a danger to the public. When you have this type of stuff that is very clearly unfit for human consumption, it does not tend to end well, unfortunately. And I wonder this year if, or even last year, again, we'll have to look at the data, have we seen a rise in people having, food related, I don't know, injuries, problems, food poisoning? Is that on the rise? Are we seeing things in the rise of maybe like salmonella or other things like that? That's something we should probably look into just to make sure and have a look, because that, ladies and gentlemen, is something we could lead on, and we could skewer the Brexiteers very, 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 very nicely. And we'd be like, what is it? The butterfly experts, the lepidopolists, I think it is. Just pinning the Brexiteers to the board with the little pins, just going, there you go. But anyway, that's a weird analogy. But anyway, as always, guys, like I say, guys, thank you very much for watching. As always, please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button on your way out. And of course, please do remember to ring the bell as well so you get notifications when we do a new video, when we go live. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page, the one off donation link called Buy Me a Coffee, where you can all buy me coffee. There's YouTube thank you button, and of course, the Pony Club down below, all which do help support the channel. And of course, guys, thank you very much for watching. And of course, we'll see you all next time.